What's up, guys? The Comics Kid 2099 here. I have a book here that I finished reading yesterday, and I wanted to do a review for it. Men Schism. This is written by Jason Aaron and is drawn by a whole bunch of people. I'm not even going to give all of their names. You got Alan Davis, Daniel Acuna. I guess I am going to give their names. One of the Chos, either Frank Cho or there's another Cho. It's one of the Chos, and then Carlos Pacheco, and then there's one of the Kuberts also. So there's all the artists who are involved with this. And this is I believe it's a 5-issue miniseries, and then this volume also collects X-Men Regenesis, which was a one-shot, kind of covered the aftermath of this event. And basically, the event is you've got the new and improved Hellfire Club is formed here, and it's a bunch of teenage kids, and they are trying to stoke the fires of anti-mutant prejudice in order to sell better weapons. That's essentially their game. And so the X-Men are obviously caught in a crossfire here, and Cyclops, who is the leader of the X-Men, he believes that it's okay to use teenagers, or as Wolverine and Cyclops are calling them, kids. He believes it's okay to use kids in this ongoing war against everything that wants to destroy mutant kind. Wolverine, in this story, believes that kids are off limits and they should not be going into the field of battle, and that if Cyclops wants somebody to fight a giant sentinel made out of metal from all over the city of San Francisco, then he should send Wolverine or a bunch of adult X-Men to fight it. And that's basically the crux of this story, and they get into this big, huge fist fight at the end, almost kill each other, and then at the end of the story, Cyclops is like, okay, well, if you want to apologize, and Wolverine's like, no, I don't want to apologize. I'm leaving. I'm going to go back to New York, and I'm going to start a school for children, a school where they can be children. And Cyclops is like, you're making a huge mistake, and basically they don't really listen to each other. Neither one of them is willing to budge on this issue because they are both really stubborn. And then roughly half of the adult X-Men go back to New York with Wolverine, and several of the students who are at the Utopia Island, they go back as well. And then that's kind of where the story ends. In premise, this is a very interesting story. Personally, I was not a huge fan of the direction that the X-Men had been going pretty much since it started in House of M, but I would say for me, it really kind of started to go downhill around the time of Messiah Complex, when the X-Men stopped being heroes who protected a world that hated and feared them, and they started just fighting for self-preservation. To me, that felt like a gross misunderstanding of the concept that is the X-Men. And that all got started back in Messiah Complex, where the X-Men didn't seem to care about fighting for humanity. They were more interested in protecting themselves. And that is not what a hero does. A hero does not act out of self-preservation. Now, obviously, they can act out of self-preservation if it means that they can then later go back to saving the lives of others. But for like 5 years, it just seemed like the X-Men weren't really doing anything but running and acting out of self-preservation. They weren't really being heroes anymore. At least it didn't seem that way to me, and I'm certain that there's going to be someone out there who is a huge fan of the post-Messiah Complex X-Men, and they are going to hate me for saying that. But the thing is, that was not the X-Men. That is not what the X-Men is about. Now, if you want to take the X-Men and run in a completely different direction, that's fine, but then for me, I would like to have something that is the X-Men, something that is true to that concept. And this story is basically a way to do that. It's a way to have your cake and eat it too. You can have Cyclops and his group who are much more militant and much more, we're here for survival and we're going to do whatever it takes to survive. And then you've got Wolverine who's kind of taking things back to basics, and that's kind of what I like, what I would want to see. And that's kind of what we've been seeing in Wolverine and the X-Men, which I've been reviewing for a couple of weeks now. So like I said, in premise, this is a very interesting idea. I don't want to say interesting so much. It's a very good idea of taking the X-Men back to basics. Having said that, it's executed in a very not good way. It's not really good in how it's executed, because I really don't buy that Wolverine is taking this stance. Wolverine is the guy who has had like 6 teenage sidekicks, and they are constantly going into the field of battle, and he has never really had an issue with that before. Remember in Joss Whedon's Astonishing X-Men, where Armor was on the Break World planet with all of these adults in a very live or die situation. And then remember, back in the 1980s, Kitty Pryde was a member of the X-Men for like over 100 issues. And at one point, she was very briefly the leader of the X-Men. When Nightcrawler, Storm, and Cyclops were not up to it, at one point, she was leading the X-Men on one mission. Wolverine didn't seem to have a problem with that. Jubilee was a full-fledged X-Man for a little while before Generation X was formed and she went to live with them. Why has Wolverine never had a problem with this before, and then out of nowhere, suddenly he's on his high horse and he says, I don't like this, I don't like that you are putting kids in danger. It's doubly weird when you consider that in Uncanny X-Force, Wolverine led a team that, spoiler, murdered a little boy for the fate of the entire planet. They thought that they were protecting the planet, so they murdered a little child. This is a little bit weird. It's really weird that Wolverine is acting so hypocritically here, where he says that children should not be put into the line of combat, and yet they've always been put into the line of combat. That's pretty much a thing ever since X-Men issue 1, where the oldest X-Man was like 18 years old, and the youngest one was like 16. This is part of the premise of the X-Men. So it's really weird that the big ideological conflict between Wolverine and Cyclops is this, when Wolverine hasn't really ever had this as be part of his characterization before. If it had been any other X-Men than Wolverine, it would have made a little bit more sense, I think. But it really doesn't work when it's Wolverine versus Cyclops. And on the other hand, I've never liked Cyclops. I guarantee you there's somebody out there who's going to hear that and they're going to just kind of cringe a little bit because everyone else in the world loves Cyclops except for me. I have never liked Cyclops, and so it's a little bit... it's a little sweet for me to get to see Cyclops get his butt handed to him a little bit from Wolverine. Now, they both get their butts handed to him. At one point, Wolverine is missing most of the skin from his face because Cyclops is blasting it off, but both of them get their butts handed to them by each other. And at the same time, it's also a little bit facepalmy that both of them are so stupid that there is literally a Sentinel right there on their front lawn, and they are too busy fighting each other to work together and fight the Sentinel. Literally, there's a Sentinel that's trying to kill them, and instead of working together to kill the Sentinel, they're working against each other trying to kill each other. That was a little stupid. I honestly don't have a whole lot else to say about this. Just the fact that in premise, I like this a lot better than I do in execution, because I really like the idea of taking the X-Men and kind of splitting it off into two separate factions, one faction that believes very differently from the other faction. I really like that idea in execution, or in premise, but the problem is, when executed, it doesn't work nearly as well. And also, part of the problem here is, when you have 4 billion people who are all working on these X-Men characters, you're going to have Rick Remender, who has Wolverine leading a team that's murdering a child, and then you've got Jason Aaron, who's writing an X-Men story where Wolverine believes that children should not be put into the field of combat, and then you've got Joss Whedon, about 8 years earlier, putting a child into a war situation on another planet, and Wolverine doesn't care. It's inconsistent because you have inconsistent writers, and that's just always going to be a problem. The only way that you could fix this would be if you downsize the number of X-Men titles to like 5, and you had maybe 2 or 3 writers writing all of them. Don't have 15 X-Men titles and 15 different writers writing all of these X-Men titles, because when you do that, you are definitely going to have characters acting out of character. This is the root of out-of-character behavior for characters like Wolverine, and even in a little bit, I would say, Cyclops. He acts very inconsistent here when you compare it to how he was acting, say, in some of the other X-Men books from around this time. Because in this book, they even mention that there's no hard feelings. If you want to go with Wolverine, you can go with Wolverine, and the people who are staying on Utopia with Cyclops, they're not going to be angry at you. And yet, over in Kieran Gillen's Uncanny X-Men, Cyclops is a total jerk face to Iceman because he's going with Wolverine to reform the school. So it's a little inconsistent, because over here you got Cyclops saying no hard feelings, and then even in the X-Men Legacy book by Mike Carey, Cyclops is saying no hard feelings. If you want to go over there, go over there. We don't need someone over here who doesn't believe in what we're doing. But then you've got Kieran Gillen having Cyclops basically say, well, fine, if you want to leave, then you can leave, but I don't like you anymore, and you're not my friend anymore. Yeah, it's a little bit inconsistent, and that's really where I'm coming down on this, is that this kind of thing, it would work a lot better, I think. You know what I'm going to say? If you've never read an X-Men book before and you read this, you would really love it, I think. But if you've read X-Men books, if you've read X-Men books from around the time that this came out, then you're not going to like it as much, because it is going to be very inconsistent. And that's really where I come down on it. So that's all I have to say about X-Men Schism. I hope that you guys liked this review, and if you read this book, that I hope you enjoyed it. I didn't hate it. It just wasn't the greatest thing that I've ever read. Until tomorrow, I will be doing another review tomorrow. So until then, I hope that you guys have a great rest of the day, and I will see you guys then. Talk to you later.